Now, welcome to another podcast episode on Actual Spirit. Today we're going to talk about Lacan's crazy wisdom in the world of AI with Thomas Hamelryck. Thomas Hamelryck is a good friend of mine. He's a researcher at the University of Copenhagen, specializing in probabilistic machine learning. He's also Belgian. And today we're going to talk about
Yeah.
his paper in the Écrits anthology published by Philosophy Portal, titled Lacan's Crazy Wisdom. Now, Thomas, to start off, Lacan's crazy wisdom. We all know that Lacan is quite crazy, right? Like, at least those who have read the Écrits to the extent that we have done. But you say, no, it's not just that he's crazy, he's also wise. There's a certain type of wisdom in this craziness. And you relate this to the apparently crazy wisdom traditions in the East. Now, what do you like make of this? Like, what is these are these Eastern crazy wisdom traditions to begin with?
Yeah. Well, to start, good afternoon, Dimitri. Good to be here and talk to you. So, we were at the Philosophy Portal retreat in France last year in the summer, and we have a common interest in Lacan and also in his very interesting style. So, and that's also why we have this conversation. So, so you said that everybody knows that Lacan is a bit crazy. I'm not so sure that everybody knows that, but so we both had the experience we both went through the entire Écrits. We read the whole thing. I think I actually read almost all of it, 80-90% of it, and that's and we blame Cadell for that. Cadell lost. I mean, we thank Cadell lost for that. And of course, if you read these Écrits, there's something weird about it, right? Because they are kind of unreadable. Um, and I think there's a quote from Edgar Allan Poe. He uses this for one of his stories. Es lässt sich nicht lesen. This book doesn't allow itself to be read, and that's actually also what Lacan said about his own Écrits, right? That they can't actually be read, but people read them anyway, and they seem to enjoy that. So I think that's the topic of today, right?
Yeah, for sure. Now, I remember that I went to this lecture by this Belgian Lacanian philosopher, and then I I asked him, why does Lacan write in the way he does? And this guy basically said, the Mark de Kezel, by the way, that's his name. He said, "Well, it's
Mm-hmm.
because Lacan is a very bad writer." Well, that's it. Lacan is just a very bad writer. But then I asked the subsequent question. Well, if we if like I play devil's advocate, maybe it's not that Lacan is a bad writer, but maybe he tries to mobilize the unconscious in a certain way with having this type of obscurantist uh, bad writing, right? And I believe that in your paper it's clear that you don't just say that Lacan is a charlatan, but you also don't just say no, it's just that you don't understand the logic if you think it's crazy, but you're somewhere in between, right? It's something, both these standpoints are missing out on something. And that's got to do with the Eastern wisdom tradition, right? So what is this type of crazy wisdom that you speak of in the title and in the paper?
Yeah, so let's kind of go a bit slow here, right? So let's build it up a bit.
Yeah.
So these Chris. So one of the things that Lacan is very interested in is a conflict within psychoanalysis that happened in the 40s, and that was the conflict between the ego psychology of Anna Freud and then the alternative take by Melanie Klein. And I believe that this conflict was called controversial discussions. It went on for 5 years or so, and Lacan was definitely more on the side of Melanie Klein than on the side of Anna Freud.
Mm.
So he was very much opposed to ego psychology. And then, so are you familiar with these two thinkers, or?
Yeah. Yeah,
So it's
generally,
like,
yes.
yeah, so ego psychology. as far as I understand it, it has the idea that the psychoanalyst needs to have a strong ego, because there the psychoanalyst almost serves as a template for a kind of a functional life for the analysant. So there's some kind of imparting of practical wisdom going from the analyst to the analysant. So you develop a strong ego that negotiates between the it. We can call that the unconscious or the instincts. Let's keep it simple. We're not in Lacanian territory yet, and then the super ego, right? So all the constraints that come from society. So the ego kind of negotiates between these two, and this is something that Lacan is really very much against. And that's one of the things that's one of the central themes of the Écrits actually. And I think that, so what is he then interested in? So he's more like on the side of Melanie Klein, although he's of course not you cannot reduce him to Melanie Klein. But Melanie Klein is much more interested in finding out what is going on in an individual analysant. It's not so much about let's say solutions or providing templates, but it's more about finding out what are the particular hang-ups of a particular person. How does that person think about or approach life? What are the typical patterns that are present in this person? And it's more like kind of almost like it's like an exploration of an individual. And there's much more emphasis on developing a certain type of wisdom about a particular individual, and that's more where Lacan comes in. And I think that this is some very interesting. This is so you ask about these Eastern wisdom traditions, and there in Hinduism there are these spiritual paths, and two of them are called Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. And Karma Yoga, that's more like a path of practical action. It's about being active in the world, getting things done. So it has some kind of very practical component. And then the other alternative, so the Jnana Yoga, that's more about developing wisdom, developing insights. And these two paths, they are recommended for different type of people. So if you have more like an intellectual and explorative mind, then you would kind of go to the Jnana path. If you are more like a practical person who wants to do action in the world, then you take the Karma Yoga part. And I think this is actually, there are some really interesting parallels there between the approach of ego psychology and the alternative of Melanie Klein. So where you can clearly see that the one is more like has some kind of like a practice, even an almost practical approach or a practical perspective, and the other one is much more interested in developing wisdom. So that's kind of one of the first, I think, parallels that I kind of tentatively see between what Lacan is talking about there and what's going on in certain Eastern wisdom traditions.
Right. So if I try to rephrase to see if I understood correctly, with ego psychology, what you get is this idea that in the clinic, a patient comes in with psychological problems, and then there's a psychologist or a psychoanalyst, let's say, and the psychoanalyst or psychologist knows better than the patient what the problems of the patient is. So, of course, the patient gets some kind of diagnosis, and maybe this is also seen as a disorder, right? It's the patient is living in a disorderly life and is not in order with, just colloquial life. But what happens then is that the way that the patient heals is because of interventions by the psychologist that are suggestive, right? So instead of doing what the patient always did, the patient should listen to the psychologist to do things differently, right? So something like cognitive behavioral therapy, I believe, falls under this category. That if you want to actually be saved from your psychological symptoms, just try to do all the cognitive tricks or do some kind of meditation practice, or maybe make some kind of planning or work with medication. And then by doing these, following the steps that the psychologist lays out for you, you can get your life back in order. You can be reintegrated in society. I would say that's what we could classify as an ego psychology. But both Melanie Klein and Lacan are not satisfied with that type of suggestive therapy.
Right.
And Freud himself also was not satisfied with suggestion. He had a phase in his life that he was trying to work with hypnosis and suggestion, but something else emerges when you don't just suggest to the patient, you should do this, you should do that. Because then you have to work with what comes out of the patient, and you have to maybe show the patient that they already know the solution to their own problems, or at the very least, how can the psychoanalyst know better the problems of the patient? He's not the patient, right? So I would say that Lacan doesn't want to work on the level of the imaginary because he doesn't want to pretend that he knows better, that he knows what is better for the patient than the patient. If the patient doesn't know, how can the psychoanalyst know, right? Only something what the psychoanalyst can do is he can bring something out in the patient so that he can reflect on what his problems actually are or are not. So this is the level that I think Lacan is working with. Is that also similar to those Eastern traditions you've described?
Yeah, so this is basically, I think this is kind of, I mean, we're of course kind of simplifying, right? I mean, I don't know that much about ego psychology, but I mean that's basically what Lacan is afraid of, that it kind of like puts the analyst in a position of power where you basically make the analyst dependent on that
Right.
power position. That's his fear and his criticism. And so basically, I think you can kind of say that ego psychology has a certain constructive approach to it, while I think Lacan is taking another approach, which is, I think, more deconstructive.
Right.
I think that's kind of the difference with it. And so what is also interesting is that if you take these Eastern traditions, there is no conflict between these paths. So you can take the karma yoga path, you can take the Jnana yoga path. They're both fine. They just pertain to different circumstances, to different people. While in Lacan, you have more like an antagonism between one approach and the other. You could argue that kind of like probably like if you want to have some good effects, you probably need a combination of some some good if you talk into ordinary language, some good advice, and then also some deconstruction of some fixed ideas that are present in somebody, right?
Right.
So I found that a really interesting. So when I'm not an expert in psychoanalysis, I might be totally wrong, but what I found very interesting in reading the Écrits and then also reading about these controversial discussions between Klein and Freud. So I found it very interesting to see this analogy with these Eastern traditions. So it's basically also a conflict between, are you going to adopt a constructive method, or are you going to adopt a more deconstructive method? And of course, Lacan is very mistrusting of anything that involves the ego, because Lacan doesn't really believe that there's much there's much to do with the ego, so to say. He doesn't really trust the ego, right?
Yeah. In the Écrits, he defines the ego as frustration. The ego is just frustration.
Yeah, right.
It's actually impotence. The ego is not, to this idea of cultivating and developing a strong ego is ridiculous for Lacan, because the ego always comes up at those moments that it pretends that it's in control, but it's actually not. It's like, when everyone around you or everyone around the person sees, okay, this guy is basically losing his shit, but this person is like trying to keep everything under control. Like that's the ego. Yeah, it's so, and then the, let's say, reinforcement of the power of the ego, this feeling of strength, is actually completely imaginary for Lacan. That's not an actual strong ego coming to the fore, but that's purely this like living out an imaginary fantasy. You could
Yeah,
say,
right.
like
Yeah.
to
Then
simplify.
I think that with respect to the imaginary, I think that Lacan and Girard actually, I think that they agree to a great extent. I always find it interesting to see how much of Girard that I recognize when I read Lacan, and the imaginary definitely corresponds to what Girard calls mimetic desire. It's the realm of rivalry, of competition, of desiring what the other desires. So that's all the imaginary, and that's definitely something that belongs to the realm of the ego, and that's one of the reasons why Lacan is very distrusting of that. But so also basically, but Lacan has a very peculiar idea of the of the of the structure of the human mind. So he puts the signifier very much central, which comes from structural linguistics, from de Saussure and that kind of thinking. And so he puts the symbolic really at the center. So there's all these plays of the signifiers, and then you could kind of say that the core of the human mind is actually this display of the signifier, and then they have the imaginary that kind of projects it all around.
Yeah. One more example on the imaginary that he gives in the Écrits that I found very interesting is transitivism, which is a phenomenon you find in very young children. And there's tons of examples here, but one of the examples is that imagine a child slapping another child. The child who is slapped starts crying, and then the one who slapped the other child also starts crying because he sees the other child crying. So that's basically
Yeah.
this what Lacan calls the semblable, right? You mirror that ego, and that's also an example of mimesis. That is
Yeah.
image.
So
So,
there's yeah.
but once he works with the signifier, it's not about uh, getting a strong ego or something, but it's about playing with words and meaning in such a way that you actually deconstruct, let's say, rigid notions, or what someone
Yeah.
took to be reality is actually not reality because things don't work the way in which they work. So you lose your footing, right? That's kind of the point of the psychoanalytical process, repeatedly losing your footing, not like getting entrenched into a more and more stable ground. And so that's basically what makes up Lacan's crazy wisdom, right? Like the fact that he plays with these dynamics, because you have to play there. Like a play is necessary in these dynamics in the sense that there's no formula that you can go by. There's not a 10-step program that you can
Right.
uh, have in the psychoanalytical process. And of course, notwithstanding the fact that I have nothing against ego psychology, you can get so much benefit also out of cognitive behavioral therapy. So there's a place for that, as you said, also in the Eastern wisdom traditions. There's a attention to that. Now, in this paper, what I found very interesting is that you relate Lacan to Salvador Dalí and
Right.
Salvador Dalí's paranoid critical method. So could you
Yeah.
explain what is this paranoid critical method and how does it relate to the crazy wisdom that we see in Lacan?
Yeah. So I read I read Lacan's biography by Rodinesco. It's a great book. It's really a fantastic book. It's super interesting. And so Lacan was really an interesting character. And in the 30s, he was hanging out with a lot of interesting people. So he was hanging out with a lot of surrealists, like for example Salvador Dali. And he was also hanging out with colorful figures like Georges Bataille, who's like a thinker of transgression and also a connoisseur of transgression. And he had a very interesting relationship with Bataille also, to like Bataille's wife then became Lacan's wife, and also
So yeah,
all kinds of
Sylvia
very
Bataille.
very Sylvia Bataille. So Lacan was actually interacting with a lot of people who were kind of playing around with Paranoia was very fashionable there. Paranoia and madness as a way to create as a way to creativity, as a way for exploration of art, exploration of society. They also had all kinds of revolutionary projects going on. So there's a lot of influence of these kind of that crazy bunch of people on Lacan. And so there's a really interesting article. I have it here actually because I wanted to give credit to it. When Lacan met Dalí, Lacan's paranoid reading of Saussure's theory of sign by Despina Alexandra Constantinidou. This from 2014, which I thought was a super interesting article. So I read about Lacan and Dalí in the Rodinesco biography, and then also found this article. And so it turns out that a lot of what Lacan is doing can be traced back to Dalí's paranoid critical method. So Lacan is very famous for these puns, right? So these strange correspondences like le nom du père, so the nom of the father and the name of the father, and then le nom du père, which means that like those who are not fooled are in error. So there's this he uses these similarities between words to kind of he connects these signifiers, and by connecting these signifiers based on the shape of the signifiers, you actually create new surprising meaning. And this is exactly what also Dalí developed with his paranoid critical method. So he had an essay from 1930, which was called what was called again, The Rotting Donkey, and there's a painting from the same era, which is called The Invisible Sleeping Woman Horse Lion. And in that painting, so you see a woman first, but the woman is actually also a lion, and you can also recognize a horse in it. So by putting all these images on top of each other, you create new meanings. And what Dalí basically says is that so the similarity that this paranoid critical method brings about, so that reveals some of these unconscious patterns that basically pull all these images together. And that's exactly what basically Lacan is doing, but he's not doing it with images. He's doing it with language. And after reading that, so if you then go back to reading the Écrits, then you can see that I don't think that Lacan is a bad writer. I think that he is basically, to a great extent, there's a certain madness, there's a certain surrealist project that is definitely part of what he's doing.
Yeah. The most vivid memory of me when I was reading the Écrits was at the very end. I believe it was the paper on science and truth. And then he finally explains the Objet Petit. What is it? And then it's such a beautiful, I wrote it down and I've been rereading it. He never gets to it, of course. But there's just the way he navigates, never getting to that point is like every sentence you think, and within each sentence also you think like, okay, he's gonna get to it. I'm finally going to be able to nail it down, because that's what we want to do. We hear a concept, big other, signifier, object A. Okay, what does it mean? Like, let's nail it down. What's the definition, right? We love definitions because it settles things, gives us that stable ground to work from. Because we want to work on something apparently, but no, like Lacan just gets keeps getting rid of that, and that was for me, like what I got from that is that the object A, if you want to understand the concept, like first of all realize the concept is confusion. That's what the concept is. Like object A is confusion. Of course, there's more to it, but fundamentally, when you bump onto it in your life, it's confusion. That's how we, let's say, experience object A, which Lacan said, if I ever invented a concept, it's object A. That's the central concept in Lacan.
Mm.
So
so he never gets to it because you also never get to the object A. So there's some kind of
also
self-referential
like you get ahead of it, right? It's like you've already passed it. So it's not only like you're always trying to get to it, it's also like, oh, we've already passed through it, and then you look back and actually maybe it was never there in the first place. But like there's all these funny quirks, right? So
there's a certain artful, a certain skillful means, as you would call it in Buddhism. So there's a certain skillful means. So it's not just like imparting dry information, but actually by reading it, there's some kind of transformational process that you go through, and it has there's a certain madness to it. There's a certain weird aspect to it, and so that's of course where we hit this crazy wisdom concept, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's an imparting of a certain knowledge that includes deconstruction, surprise, humor, putting on the wrong footing, and so on. So that this is very common in Eastern wisdom traditions, in Hinduism and Buddhism.
Totally. And I think that Lacan also says somewhere in the Écrits that 100 mediocre psychoanalysts do not further its theory by 1 iota. Like, it requires tact, right? That's skillful means, and that also means that once you decide to go into a psychoanalysis, that means that your psychoanalyst has a lot of power, and also has a lot of power in how the process changes you, right? So the subject is involved. It's not, let's say, it's not neutral. It's not indifferent. Whereas in a more like, I call it like practical wisdom types of process of journeys, then it's more neutral. It doesn't really matter who your master is, or at least it says it doesn't really matter, right? Because maybe it always kind of does matter. But Lacan wants to get psychoanalysis out of that master discourse, right? He's not there to impose anything on you. He's more there to, pull something under the rug. Now, what I found a little bit surprising about your paper is that at a certain point you say that you don't want to reduce Lacan to, let's say, a purveyor of crazy wisdom, but you also speculate that he might be useful to understand and interpret large language models. Now, the fact that it comes from you, how many computer scientists read Lacan? I don't think so many do.
I don't know. They're probably too smart to spend time on that, but yeah, I do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So before going into AI, I wonder, like, what do you, as like a computer scientist, if you put on that persona, what do you make of his mathematics?
Oh, that's
because
so
it's littered with maths, right? The phallus is the complex number I.
Yeah. I mean, he got a lot of criticism from that, especially from Alain Sokal and Jean Bricmont. This is nonsensical, and it's really funny. So I have quite a few books about Lacan. You can see that often, they have these people who start with flashing these formulas, and I can kind of see that you don't know what this means. You have no idea what.
But did Lacan know?
I think he's just. I mean, okay. I'm going to give you this imaginary thing. I mean, that's a really good story because it's again this paranoid critical method, right? So you have the signifier, and then you have a bar, and then you have the signified, right? So that's structural linguistics. Now there's actually, and I got this from this paper again. So there is actually a big difference between the Saussure and Lacan. So this bar in the Saussure between the signifier and the signifier actually ties them together, right? So there's like, it connects them. But in Lacan, it's a division. It divides the signifier and the signified, right? But now I said division. Now division, that also has a mathematical interpretation. And the Saussure actually wrote it up as, you have the signifier, bar, signified. And I said division. So Lacan says, okay, this bar is a division. So I say, like, well, the signifier divided by the signifier divided by the signified is then equal to the signified again in some different way. And if you then follow the rules of division, you basically see that you have something that s squared is equal to -1. And the quantity in mathematics, if you square it, if that's equal to -1, that's the imaginary unit. So there's something called complex numbers, imaginary numbers, they're two-dimensional numbers.
Right, yeah.
So it just warps all of that together. So now so in Dalí, we have the lion, the horse, and the woman, right? So in Lacan, we have the saussure with the S bar S. In Lacan, we have S bar S, but there, the bar is not tying it together, but the division. And then suddenly it's just like, okay, division. So now I go to mathematics, I use division, and I end up with something that's called the imaginary, which of course ties back to my to the triad symbolic, imaginary, real. So he's just playing around with all of these things. It's again the paranoid critical method. You just see all these formal similarities in these signifiers, and you lump it all together, and you create new delirious, crazy, surreal meaning. So again, it's like and I kind of feel like I'm kind of giving away the joke, right? So when I was writing this article, it was a bit like, I found it a bit, because I don't want to, I don't want to make fun of people. Like I'm not reducing Lacan to a bunch of nonsense, but there is a certain mischievous aspect to it. And I think that the real interesting part is that if you just rehash Lacan, right? So you just learn all of this by heart and you write it in your books, you're not getting it. You're really not getting it. And he has a name for it, actually calls it poubellication, which is a combination of poubelle, which means garbage bin, and publication, right? Poubellication. So there's a lot of poubellication going on. So a lot of people are just, they're kind of rehashing all these diagrams and, the imaginary, the imagining number I refers to the follows. And so when Lacan says it, it's funny. I think it's fantastic, and I think it's super fun. But when somebody else just rehashes it, then it's a bit pathetic.
Yeah.
Because it's just copying. And you cannot copy crazy wisdom. You cannot copy this kind of playing around with this. So it's just like, it would be like, painting exactly in the style of Dalí. That you can't just copy it. You have to kind of take these approaches and then make it your own. And I think, for example, Slavoj Žižek does a good job of it. Now, he's a very Lacanian kind of person, right? So a lot of jokes, a lot of puns, a lot of surprises. And he's very influenced by Lacan, but it doesn't copy him. So I think that kind of, Žižek is Lacan done well.
Yeah.
I would argue. What do you think?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And what you said about giving away the joke, I feel like that with Hegel's absolute knowing. I think Hegel did the same thing, and Lacan he called Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit the funniest book that exists, because the kind of joke that there is that it's such a dense book, right? It goes through like world history and spiritual development, and it ends in absolute knowing. So of course, like you as an eager young student want to get absolute knowing, get to that mystical point that you basically it's gonna be a revelation, but you come there and then you realize that actually absolute knowing is nothing but the process that has led up to absolute knowing, which is a tautology, which is what absolute knowing is. It's a joke, right? It's non-substantial. It's something that just withers away, right? Like the moment that you say it, right? So it's not a stable ground. That's finally now you can methodically work on things, but I think the joke too is in philosophy itself. Like Socrates, the fact that Socrates says, "I know that I don't know," or that Descartes says, "I think, therefore I am." Like, who cares? It's so insubstantial. It's so inconsequential to say such things. But I think we can give away the joke because also like if you will really dive into those works of Plato or Descartes or Lacan or Hegel, that you'll still be duped by it, so to say, right? Like it's still like le nom du père. You still have to believe in it. Just give him just give him some ground, just be open to it, and you'll be duped. Don't worry about this.
Yeah, but that's what it means with le nom du père, right? So it's like if you're not fooled by it, you don't have this transformational process. And you cannot get the joke either, but also it's not just a joke. There is some kind, you gain something from it, and So just like, so you gave the example of Hegel, right? What you cannot do is you cannot say like, okay, now I am right and I know this. Oh, why is that? Oh, because I have absolute knowing.
Yeah.
You cannot. That you just can't do that. It's just like say you also cannot say like, oh, I can just do this. Why is that? Oh, because this is crazy wisdom. Then you didn't get it at all. It's an impossibility. So you cannot copy it. You cannot use it as a justification for anything. So the moment that you reify it, the moment that you turn it into a thing, it's not there anymore. Then you're just you're just deluded. Then you just and so that's what I think what he means with this publication. And so you have to kind of make Lacan your own. And it's so. And now we come back to, so you asked about large language models and AI and stuff like that. So I think that Lacan provides you with a treasure trove of signifiers, of symbols, and these can well be used to make your own let's say approach to understand certain things. And what I found really striking is that Lacan puts an enormous emphasis on signifiers, not on the signified, not on what I mean with what I say, but it's basically just this chain of signifiers. And he even uses a Markov chain, which is a very simple machine learning method, a probabilistic machine learning method or probabilistic model that is often used to describe language. It was one of the simplest models to generate language. And the really interesting thing is that if we have these attention mechanism large language models, and they don't really have any concept of a world underneath. It's basically just a chain of signifiers. It's more complicated than a Markov model, but it's not that much more complicated than a Markov model. Okay, there's some underlying neural networks, and they're really big, but you apparently can create language that for a human being is completely interpretable and looks like somebody's talking to you, but there's really nobody there. And so often I was kind of thinking about, well, maybe Lacan is not exactly correct about how humans work, because I actually believe that we are not just a chain of signifiers. And I know that I'm kind of reducing Lacan very much. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but it comes very close to describing what these large language models are doing. Actually, they're just chains of signifiers, and you can apparently get a lot done with that.
Yeah, I want to read a quote by Žižek that I think is very relevant here. But first, what you say is super important, that Lacan moves away from the focus on meaning or the signified and moves to, let's say, the chain of signifiers. Now, I would add to this that it's not only what becomes relevant here is it's not only that Lacanian psychoanalysis focus on what you say instead of what you mean, which is true, but also not only how you say it, but more specifically the position from which you speak. So to who do you speak what you are speaking, right? And at the very beginning of the Écrits, he starts off by talking about style and saying style is the man, but it's also, we have to add to this, it's the man who one addresses. So there is something in speech, in language, that it's not only about the content of what you say, but also the very form, like who am I and to whom am I saying this, which is also huge in structural linguistics itself. Now, something that I find very fascinating in Lacan is that, inspired by structural linguistics, he says that psychoanalysis exploits the poetic function of language. And just a disclaimer, the funny thing about Lacan is he constantly references so many things. But if you just haven't read those things, you wouldn't know that poetic function is a very specific technical term used by Roman Jakobson in his introduction to structural linguistics, which means poetic function of language is the fact that language is self-referential, but not on the level of meaning only, but also on the level of parallelism or on the level of rhyme, right? So you talk about in the paper about the polysemantic neurons, which are activated by what seems to be like unrelated features in superposition. and you relate this
Right.
to the critical method, right? Like a horse is a woman, is maybe like an iron bar or something. And then the associative nature of the signifier. I think in structural linguistics inspired by Lacan, what the two terms that come up here are metaphor and metonymy. These ways of the ways that the signifier relates to itself, basically. So a metaphor is, of course, when I say, Thomas, you are a flower, right? I'm substituting one for the other. And metonymy is when I am saying I'm counting one head, here, because you're not only a head, you're also a person or a body, but actually I'm not seeing your body.
Right.
So, um, so yeah, these would be relevant if we want to get into like a Lacanian fine tuning of AI. Now, I think some other
Well,
lesson.
maybe we should explain, because you said something about these neural networks that we should explain, right?
Okay,
So
sure, yeah.
so it turns out that there are, so you can have, like, let's say that you have images, right? And so you can have images that are different. Let's say, a boat, a dog, and then something else, and they activate the same neurons. So, and I found that interesting, because there's something in so both Dalí and Lacan are playing around with the idea that there is something in you that pulls these signifiers or these images together. And this is a concept that's also touched upon in analyzing neural networks. And so so people are studying, so why are these neurons activated by input that is actually different? And that has all kinds of implications for making networks efficient, not too big, and so on and so on. And I found that that's an interesting parallel. So you have a lot of these. I see a lot of these things that are touched upon in Lacan, and that are kind of like coming back now, surprisingly, in the form of these AI methods. So I just wanted to explain what you were talking about. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So, I wonder what you would think about this. This is the quote by Žižek. The problems is not that chatbots are stupid, it is that they are not stupid enough. It is not that they are naive, missing irony and reflexivity. It is that they are not naive enough, missing when naivete is masking perspicacity. The real danger then is not that people will mistake a chatbot for a real person, it is that communicating with chatbots will make real persons talk like chatbots. Missing all the nuances and ironies, obsessively saying only precisely what one thinks one wants to say. So the danger with AI is not that we're just too fascinated by the AI and we think they're humans and the AI humanizes itself, but the problem that we become like these chatbots, which have no sense of humor, they have no sense of irony and stuff like this. And, I was recently listening to a podcast with a guy, and he was saying that he was doing research, and then he went to ChatGPT and he asked ChatGPT some questions, and then he said, yeah, and ChatGPT didn't know the answer to that question, so how could I know the answer to that question? So I think that's like
Huh?
exactly the
Yeah.
problem, right? Like that's when we start becoming like these chatbots, when we say, oh, if the chatbot doesn't know, then how could I know? Because somehow it's become a big other. And today, of course, as you say in the paper, LLMs are being, let's say, optimized for what the tech big other wants. But a Lacanian AI would, like, if we would go into like Lacanian fine tuning of AI, it wouldn't be such a thing. It would like have like a sensitivity to irony, right? To jokes, to things that are so stupid that actually might contain something more than meets the first glance. So yeah, what do you think about this quotes by Žižek and the fact that it seems like more and more people are becoming like AI, which is a very uncanny thought, of course.
Yeah, I think this is a good point. We are interacting a lot with these social media technologies, of course, via X, via Facebook, and so on. And these are governed by AI, and then these AIs in turn, they are trained, of course, by these companies, and that's also something that I found interesting. So if you think about it, so they are tuned. So first you train them, but then you can tweak them. So you can ask, for example, you can ask them questions, and then you can get them 2 different answers, and then you can ask humans to, or you can even some organization can then say like, well, this answer is better than the other, and then you tune them. You can kind of say it's a form of ego psychology, right? It's kind of like, we don't want this answer. This is too crude. This is too rude, and so on. We want that answer. So that's a big that's an important part of making these models acceptable, right? So your question is, so that's an ego psychology model. So then you can kind of what would a Melanie Klein, Jacques Lacan model look like, right? I kind of play around a bit with that in the article. I don't really have a clear answer to it, but you could imagine, I don't know, training models that are very tuned with connecting concepts that are not directly related. You could train a model that is very tuned to exploration, not so much in being politically correct or being correct in a conventional way, but that actually brings together unusual ideas. It's just I haven't. It's so these are just, but these are more. I put that in the article as examples of to kind of show how just engaging with thinkers like Jacques Lacan actually could kind of, it could expand your mind and make you think about real practical things. And it's not just pie in the sky or therapeutics, but you can actually start thinking about these things. And so this is also something that we talked about with Cadell, right? With Cadell last, and that is that questions that used to be purely philosophical, they become almost engineering questions. Is this thing conscious or not? I mean, a couple of years ago, you had this Google employee who said like, "Hey, this LLM is conscious," and then Google fired him. But I don't think that these LLMs are. I mean, I know how they work. It's linear algebra, but but it's a good question. When is something conscious? When is it sentient? When does it has an internality that we also have? And what is that actually? And then you immediately, that's one of the biggest open philosophical questions today, right? So Peter shows that Hughes, for example, is very much interested in that. So you have the whole process philosophy, panentheism philosophy that is thinking about this. That you can see that questions that were that maybe a decade ago were purely philosophical and who cares about this, and suddenly they become existential and they become engineering questions.
Yeah, I was just about to mention the fact that since AI models are mostly being optimized for efficiency, of course, AI uses up a huge amount of energy, especially the most cutting edge models like of OpenAI. Like one query, one prompt, I don't know how much exactly, but it takes up huge amounts of energy. Which means 2 things, right? Like that means that, and in Trump's cabinet, they are talking about really massively investing in energy for the coming AI, the years that AI is going to be popularized and developed. But then I think a Lacanian fine-tuning of AI wouldn't really go after efficiency. So I think maybe we need a lot of computer power to even get into such a matter of like Lacanian fine-tuning, because the question of efficiency is a question of I think it's like an ego psychological question. Like, do you have an efficient life? Do you organize things in a sufficient manner according to normality, like, or according to what's most optimal to you? Like, a crazy wisdom is not about the most optimal thing. It's about undermining, right? So it's funny how you said that indeed something that seems only philosophical before becomes an engineering question, because then what does efficiency even mean, right? Like yeah, and I think this is also a shift that we are going through culturally with on the scale of like centuries, that in modern philosophy with Descartes and Spinoza, what happens is that there is an this final cause of Aristotle is set aside. So teleology, idea that God's will has a certain type of destiny that is good for us, like that's set aside to simplify to the utmost.
Is that by Descartes?
Yeah, so Descartes says that philosophy is concerns itself with the efficient cause. So with how causality functions and how reasoning works and how that's reflected into ontology. With Spinoza, you get this idea of God is impersonal and doesn't give a shit about us. So there's not really a final cause. Leibniz tries to say, no, actually they are united. So there's a fundamental harmony in the universe that, you know, also means that for Leibniz, our reality is the best reality that there is, which is basically how he says that what's logical is also good. Now, Kant and Hegel...
low standards.
Huh?
He has low standards.
But the thing is, you could say to Leibniz, well, if this is the best reality there is, it's also the worst. But then no, because God, right? So because God says it's good and God is good, so it's good. Anyhow, so what's interesting about Lacan in relationship to Aristotle's four causes is that Lacan actually says that it's not just four causes, there's a fifth cause. And this fifth cause is the object cause of desire. So this is actually what has like kind of undergirded and underlined the history of philosophy, but has never been acknowledged within philosophy.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think, to cut a long story short, this is how Lacan goes beyond Hegel, because for Hegel, ultimately it's still between efficient cause and final cause, whereas for Lacan, there's also the object cause of desire. Now, yeah, if scientists, like hard science, is mostly concerned with efficient causality, not with what is the reason that planets orbit in the way they do. Then you get into the realm of metaphysics or philosophy, the question of why do things happen. But for Lacan, it's not even just why or how. It's the object cause of desire. It's that enigmatic confusion that's deep within us, but also just purely on the surface. So
that's the Girardian aspect of human behavior, right? It's mimetic desire that there's no. So this is the romantic notion that you have this self. If I look into myself deep enough, then I will see what I really want.
Yeah.
But there's nothing there. You always look at other people or you think. You imagine what other people want, and that's actually going to determine what you desire, at least with respect to the car, the wife, the career, the object that you buy. That all comes from the other. And I think Hegel. So there are some differences, but there are some subtleties there. But I think that both Hegel, Lacan, and Girard agree on this: that the desire is something that comes from outside, from the other, and so there is actually certain absence there if you look. If you only look at the individual, there is that doesn't provide you with an explanation. You have to look at the interdividual, at the group, the group perspective. Yeah. There's a lot of Girard that I mean, it's cryptic, and you can spend years reading Lacan and not really getting what he means. I think I did that because I recommend first reading Girard and then reading Lacan, not the other way around. So if you first read Girard and then you read Lacan, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, so yeah, and then you have a lot of concepts that you can be very precise about. The other way around is that, I started reading Lacan before Girard, and I thought, oh, this is really interesting, but I didn't really. I had the feeling that I was getting a bit lost in the symbols and the concepts, and I kind of took a detour via Girard, and then now I have a better appreciation of Lacan and also his more mischievous goals. Now I think it's as we talked about, it's quite a trip, right, to engage with Lacan. This is also something that maybe we haven't touched upon. This is what is so great about Lacan. It gives you something to talk about, and that is one of the skillful means of psychoanalysis. They want to keep you talking, right? You have to talk and work through things, keep on talking, and this is what Lacan does. You read the Écrits, and then you want to talk to people because nobody understands anything, and you want to talk with other people who also don't understand it and discuss what does this mean and what does that mean. And this is what Cadell does with great skill. Brings together people with around difficult text and get them talking, right? And that there's something transformative and something really valuable about that. And you cannot do that with a trivial text that only gives you dry information.
Yeah.
Humans are like this and
Yeah.
this and this. Here are 20 points. Well, okay, you read the 20 points and then you're kind of done, right? But reading the Écrits, you need to talk to other people, discuss what it means, bring a community together, and that's valuable in itself. So in that way, Lacan provides you with an alternative to the Bible, because this is what people used to use the Bible
Right.
for, right? So
They
it's
used to
a
talk about that.
document that, yeah. So this, and Lacan himself says, like, there's this little book, Discourse to the Catholics or something like it says, like, well, one day religion will cure us from the symptom that is psychoanalysis, and everything will be doused in meaning. And what meaning will that be? Religious meaning, of course.
Yeah. Which is what we are seeing today, right? This huge religious
Yeah.
revival in the West.
A huge turn back to religion. Yeah.
And it's
very interesting.
It's here in the Netherlands. It's happening too, and it's also young people. You know, it's very much
Yeah.
young people who are going back into religion. So it's yeah, it's
Well,
psych-
what kind of religion is it? Like Protestantism, or or newer forms of religion,
well,
like
I
Buddhism?
mean, I think just to go according to statistics in Amsterdam, more and more people are going to the church.
Yeah.
And generally the rest of the Netherlands follows whatever Amsterdam is doing, and also what we're seeing in the nationwide. Yeah, that's what happens usually. It's also similar to U.S. and Europe, right? Like if there's a Black Lives Matter in the U.S., and a few days later, also in Europe, we start
But
doing
not
that.
again mimetics. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mimetics,
yeah. Or with music, which is also why like Netherlands is so behind in hip hop. You know, you listen to hip hop from the Netherlands, is like fuck. Like in America, they were doing this 20 years ago. And that's another topic. But so what we're also seeing in the terms of religion is that nationwide Bibles are being sold more and more. And again, it's young people buying Bibles. So there's many more examples here. But I maybe we could speculate from that liberal hedonism, or what you also have called like the ersatz ritual, this is really not giving us something to talk about. Whereas,
Right.
getting a Bible, that gives you something to talk about, and people they do want to talk about something, but yeah, with what we're seeing, I think there's also a lot of danger to that idea of returning to some prior state of religion, like let's say the fundamentalist types of religion. And I think actually
Yeah.
psychoanalysis and Girard too, by actually showing us that religion reflects an anthropology, is showing that it's not really about the mystical images and let's say the beauty you get to experience in religious rituals, but what is happening there anthropologically, right? And how can we talk about that and extrapolate that in like a secular way, right? Because that's what Girard does. He shows us that Jesus is not just bullshit according to a lot of atheist perspectives, but he shows us something so fundamental about the anthropology of the human. And I think Lacan is, and also I think Hegel already kind of started this. Hegel's sometimes blamed for having a very theological philosophy, which is true. But then Hegel's also obsessed with spirit, and for Hegel, spirit is nothing but language itself. So Feuerbach, one of the first responders to Hegel, said that uh, actually religion is just a reflection of anthropology. I think he was the first one to say that, and he was a massive student of Hegel. So yeah, we'll see in the future how the prediction of Lacan will play out, right? Like if religion will just massively come back and modernity will kind of recede into the background, or if this, like let's say, fragile connection between the sacred and the profane that has been inaugurated in modernity will have more lasting consequences for mankind in the, let's say, coming decades. And yeah, that's indeed, like I find it fascinating that Lacan gives us some tools to think this with. And do you have any last words that you want to give to our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, maybe try to read the Bible and Lacan together. That's a good. Yeah, I think this. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that is now revealed. So we know a lot about anthropology. I think that Girard is right about fundamental anthropology, about the scapegoat mechanism, mimetic desire, origin of language, and things like that. So, and that is something that whether you believe or not, and whatever that means for you, believe, it doesn't really matter. So these structures are there, and then on top of that, so that kind of transforms religion, I think, and it's not so just seeing this anthropological component that will transform religion itself, and that will make new forms of belief possible. And you can see that everywhere. You can see that in beginning of the 20th century, the philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead, famous mathematician, famous physicist, who actually put God in his metaphysical system. You have Hartshorne with his book on philosophers talking about God, because what is God? When Dawkins, for example, talks about God, it's a very specific God. It's theism, right? It's a grandfather in the sky with a beard who sometimes does a miracle. I mean, that's the God of a 3-year-old, right? He believes in that. So there are many other ways of talking about God. You have the God of Spinoza.
He does believe in it,
you know.
It's his big other. He keeps like
speaking
to his big other.
Yeah, and then seeing him talk to Jordan Peterson,
it's like it's like a child trying to convince you that the boogeyman really doesn't exist, while jittering and stuff like this.
They're both. I mean, I like both of these guys. They have good things to say sometimes. Things to say, but I think that there are. I mean, these are exciting times. We know a lot, and there are a lot of new perspectives possible. And it helps to I mean, if that's your path, again, I think this is a Jnana yoga. So this is a path of wisdom, right? It's for people who like to think and read and talk, and bring a community together of people who think about things, and I think is very valuable. I think, for example, what Cadell is doing with Philosophy Portal, that's also where we know each other from. I think that these are very transformative and valuable practices. So opportunities.
Yeah. Let's end it with it. Read the Bible and read Lacan.
Yes.